This is the third and final part of my colour pencil portrait series. Today I'm going to be adding in the face. I'm going to start this portrait off just by lightly blocking in the eyebrows so I don't lose them later on with the blending throughout the forehead. And then I'm going to add my base layer of one of the colours I'm using for my skin. And once that base layer is down, I'm going to work in the shadows that I can see in my reference photo. Now, I do go a bit berserk with these shadows on the forehead. Later on in the portrait, I will have to correct them. So for now, they're not going to look quite right, just bear with them. So once I've got enough of the coverage down, I will go over with my solvent to blend out. And then once that's completely dry, I'm going to go back over with exactly the same colours that I used on my first layers. And then go over and blend with my solvent again. I'm doing this to make sure I've got a nice and even base. I'll then go over with white pencil where the highlighted areas are, and then blend that out. And what that's going to do is it's going to marry the lighter areas and the shadowy areas together a bit better, so there's not quite as much of a harsh difference between those. So once those layers are down, I'm now going through with my darker shades and shadows underneath the hair, because I want the hair to look like it's a part of the body. There'll be shadows underneath it. It's not just sort of stuck on and floating. So I'm trying to make it look as if the hair is a part of the portrait and goes with the face. And I'm also working again on a few more layers just to add in the right amount of colour and saturation I need for the skin. When I go down to the eyes, the important thing to remember about eyes is that the whites of the eyes aren't white, they're normally grey. So I start off with a light grey pencil and then I'll go over that with white to add the depth in there that I need. And then I'll colour in the dark areas and then add my shadows and colours to the iris as well. But don't leave the whites of the eye white, it won't look right, it won't look natural, they are grey. And also pay attention to things like the tear ducts. Make sure you don't miss out a tear duct in the corner of the eye. And also don't miss out the waterline as well. There is a waterline on the bottom eyelid that generally you can see 9 times out of 10 in photographs. Make sure you're including that, otherwise your eye is going to look very unnatural and it'll look really strange when you start adding eyelashes. So as before, I've just added the skin tone and layered through the colours and blended. And you can see there are lots of colours that are going in here. Skin isn't just one colour. Don't think, I'll get this right. If I just have that right perfect colour, everything will work. It won't. The skin is multitonal. It's changed by the lighting and the season, and if they've just come from outside. There's so many different factors in what colour the skin is going to look. So pay attention to your reference photo and don't be afraid to add those colours to the skin. It'll make it look that bit more realistic. So working on the other eye now, again, I started with a grey base on the whites of the eyes. And then as you can see with the whites of the eyes, they're looking pretty white now. They're not, they're still a light grey. But as you add the other colours around them and more detail, the lighter that grey is going to look. And so it might look a bit dark and a bit weird to begin with, but the more you build up around it, the lighter that colour is going to look. It looked really dark to begin with because it was against the stark white of the paper, and when you're fighting against the white of the paper, things are always going to look darker than they actually are. That's why I did all the hair and the background around this one, because I wanted to better be able to judge my contrast and my lights and darks in the face. And I thought, well, the more white that I've got rid of, the easier I'm going to find that. So further defining the eyes now, I've added a bit of a lash line. With young children and little girls, well, young children in general, be careful with things like the eyebrows and with the eyelashes. They're not going to be jet black generally. So there are a few exceptions to the rule, but generally they're not going to be jet black. And things like the eyebrows aren't going to be solid. They're quite sparse really on children, so make sure you're not making them look like they've got makeup on, unless they have makeup on, obviously. It's very easy to overdo it. So the eyebrows aren't going to be black and look like they've got mascara. So, and they're their eyebrows. Their eyelashes aren't going to look like they're black with mascara. So they're normally dark browns or beiges, depending on what colour the hair is. Pay attention. Obviously, some people do have jet black hair and they will have the darker eyelashes, but really pay attention to your reference photo. Otherwise, you're going to make them look like they're in a pageant or something rather than natural. But as I say, if makeup's the look you're going for, then perfect. Just follow your reference photo. Just bear in mind that hair is more sparse generally if you're having a natural look of the eyebrow area, and they're not jet black when you go into the eyelashes. So all I'm doing is I'm just building up my colours and my saturation, and then going back to the forehead and working on that where I can see the colours aren't quite right, and then coming back down. Now this is a portrait of my daughter, and she has got blue eyes. Well, they're blue-grey. Most people with blue eyes don't have bright blue eyes. Again, there are exceptions to the rule, but normally you're working with greys. I do add a bit of a lighter blue here and there to add a reflection to her eyes, but mostly I've been working in greys to build up the colours in there. I'm moving down to the nose now. The important thing to remember about noses is there are no lines. It is all shadow to create the nostrils and to create the shape of the nose. The minute you start adding lines, you're going to get a cartoon. And again, if that's the look you're going for, brilliant. But if you're going for a more realistic approach, then you want to be building up your shadows and paying attention. And when you're building up these shadows, there are some shadows that are soft all the way around, and there are some shadows that have a harsher line on one edge and a softer line on the other. Pay attention to that and blend away from where the sharp line is. So if you've got an area of high definition that you need to keep crisp, then blend away from that to help keep your shading look that bit more natural. When I've moved on to the cheek, I'm adding some pinks. Now, it's easy to try and add a pink. I know skin's like a pinky colour. It's not. It's a lot of different colours. But pink does have its place sometimes. My daughter in this picture is outside. It's a bit chilly. It's not cold, but it's a little bit of a chilly winter's day. She's been running around and she's got a bit of a flush to her cheeks. So to add that colour to her cheeks, I am using a pink. But I'm not just using a pink. I'm still blending it in with all the other skin tones. And as you can see, I'm using a lot of purples and things in the shadows to add that contrast in there. And when I'm not happy with a colour, I'll go over it, I'll blend it out, and I'll work a bit more on that area. Better defining the crease above her eyes now. I've decided that her right eye didn't have quite enough shadow and highlight and colour in there. So I'm going through and adjusting before I move on to the right hand cheek. I'm just doing the same as I did on the left hand side. I'm adding my base colour. I use the same process really throughout the whole face. I did it on the forehead, and I add my base colour, I add my contrast and my darks, and then my lights, and I'll blend it, and I'll go back over it, and I'll blend it. It's just a layering process. Just make sure that you're not using too heavy a hand, because you're going to want to add lots and lots of layers as you're going to make it look as realistic as you can. Now, again, as I always say, I am not the best artist. I am not the most experienced, and my portrait looks realistic. It looks like my daughter to me and my family. But I'm sure in a year or two, I'll be laughing at this portrait. I'm just showing you the tips and tricks that I've picked up along the way that have helped me. Now, I'd hope that with tips and tricks that you're picking up from me and other people, that you'll become far better than I am. That's my goal. I just want to give people a helping hand to start with. So if you're already a much better artist and you can see mistakes that I'm making, I'm learning too. I'm just trying to share what I know as I go along. So back down to the chin now. I'm adding the shadows that I can see in the chin and blending out. I'm using a few different colours for all the skin tone on my daughter here. For the actual skin tone, I'm using quite a fleshy, light, I think a light ochre 10% in the Caran Dache, I think it's called, or burnt ochre 10%. And then I'm going over it with a burnt sienna 10% as well, mixing those two colours to get the very, very base tone. And then again, adding a million and one colours on top of that as well, in order to add my darks and my lights and my shadows. And pay attention when you're doing nostrils as well. It's very easy to make them look very, very strange and like you've got raisins up the nose or something. There is a dark, obviously a very dark area in nostrils, but they're surrounded by different shades of slightly lighter colours. So make sure that you're paying attention to your reference photo so you don't end up with two raisins stuck onto the bottom of your nose, because that looks weird. Now, the lips were a challenge for me. I started off with a nice sort of light pink colour, and then some oranges and some deeper reds. And as I've added that, I've decided to go in and change the contrast around different parts as I do. And so building up now the contrast. Now, at the moment, she's looking quite lipsticky, which we don't want because she's not wearing lipstick. Building up the shadows around and then blending through, which again has toned everything down because those colours have mixed together. And I'm seeing where there's a problem with my contrast and where I want to build up other colours. So I don't just work on one bit at a time when I'm working. I adjust things as I go along. That's just how I like to work. I added whites there to add some highlights to her lips, and it also helps tone down that pink colour. You can see they're starting to look a bit more of a natural colour. They still need more contrast in there. And then I'm adding in some more highlights, and I'm just working on the neck as well, because I'd already blocked in the neck. I just added a few lighter details to that as I went. So now adding a bit more definition to some of the details on her lips and some of the contrast. But I sort of build up the colour and then knock it down, and build up the colour and knock it down to try and get the lips the right sort of colour for what my daughter's lips look like. Now, my daughter generally has somewhat chapped lips. So I wanted to show that, but I didn't want to make them look too drastic in this portrait. This is a gift for a family member, so I want us to be looking I want us to look like herself, but a nice version of herself, if that makes sense. So back through now, just deepening up some of the shadows, adding a bit more definition to the lips and a bit more colour through her cheeks. I decided she was looking a bit pasty, so I added a bit more colour throughout certain areas, and then upping the highlights. Because as with everything, your contrast is what makes things look realistic. So if you get your contrast right, then the colouring is secondary, really. Because I could have painted her. You can paint a portrait green and it just looks like they're in a green room or something, or green light. But here's where I'm just adjusting the contrast on the shadows that were on her forehead. I'd used a Faber Castell pencil eraser, Faber Castell Perfection it's called, pencil eraser, just to, it's a pen eraser even, to rub out the shadow that was overbearing on her forehead there. And then I went over it with white and then over it with other colours, just to tone that down a bit more, because I was feeling it was looking a bit like she was bruised rather than had a shadow. And darkening up some of the hairs on her eyebrows, because whereas I don't want her to look like she's wearing makeup, she does have a few darker hairs in there, and follow the direction. And now I'm going through with brush and pencil, touch up texture and titanium white, just to add a few final highlights to a few areas, and that is the portrait done.
I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please leave me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon. That way you'll be notified of any new content that I post. For now though, bye guys.